Hello everyone and welcome to my latest video. Today we'll be taking a look at the Leica ZM11, the Launch Edition. First things first, watch videos are very difficult to do, and so I have a newfound respect for watch reviewers. Very difficult. I had to change my lighting. As you can tell, it's a little bit more contrasty just because the reflections. I did my best to avoid the reflections off the crystals of the watches, and so lighting is very different. It's a little bit moodier, but hopefully as I get up closer and kind of do these side views like this, you can sort of see. But as well, I did take a lot of stills. Stills are a lot easier is because you can really make sure that the angle is correct. You're not getting any reflections on your crystals. So I will be embedding some of the images I took, and I had a lot of fun learning a lot about how to do watch photography. This is my first look here, and this isn't really going to be a review. I don't even know what to call it. It's just my first impressions. I don't even know what the thumbnail is going to be called. Maybe something to do with like, why is Leica making watches or something like that. So let's go over some of the things we're going to be doing in this video. I will be looking at this watch from a functional standpoint. So go over the specs as well as sort of my philosophy about watches. And the first thing we're going to do is answer three questions. One is, why am I reviewing watches? Does anyone really need a dedicated wristwatch today? And then, who is this watch for? And with those three things, I'm going to be looking at it from three different perspectives. And this is my quote. I basically say, all purposeful tools serve me in three different ways, which is function, storytelling, and style. And those are the three ways we're going to be looking at the ZM11. And so, first of all, why am I reviewing watches? I love watches. You guys have probably noticed in my YouTube videos, oftentimes I'll have two watches on. I have none now because I'm going to be wearing some of these watches here. I only have one Leica watch. These two are German brands. This is Cobalt, and this is 10-11-9, and that's just I have a reason why I have a G-Shock on here. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But here's the ZM11, and I do have other cameras laid out here. My quick history about watches is I grew up, I think around 10 years old is when I got my first watch. And so when I first got my watch, it was my first grown-up tool, I guess you could say. Remember, we didn't have cell phones or computers. You need to go to a public square, or maybe your school had a clock up on a wall. If you're at any kind of public shopping mall or something, you're looking up to find the time everywhere you go. And so to have a watch on your own wrist was basically your first tool you had. So when your mom said be home by 4, pre-watch days, you didn't really know what 4 o'clock meant. But once you got a watch, you knew exactly what 4 o'clock was. And so to me, time was very important. I journaled since I was quite young, when I could just barely write. I always wanted to remember things, so I was always recording my life, was always writing notes down, and that eventually led me to music, which was all about kind of like storytelling and communicating through music. And then I started writing short stories, and then photography is all about archiving and remembering moments in my life. And so to me, watches came hand in hand with all the things. Music is all about timing, right? Photography is all about timing. All my little hobbies, a lot of my passions revolved around time. And so I've always worn watches, and oftentimes I would wear two watches. The reason why I would wear two, let's just go over. I was going to talk about this later, but let's just talk about it now. This is my G-Shock titanium. So these are both titanium watches, but when I drive, I look at my wrist and I can immediately tell. Just right now, without even reading the time, I know it's 7, right? You just know the position. So to me, I call what's the term I call it? It's like looking at a photo of your grandfather versus the name of your grandfather written down. When it's written down, you have to read it. And you're like, oh yeah, that's my grandfather. Versus something like this, you see a picture of your grandfather, you already know. So it's kind of like iconographic. So to me, an analog dial, very easy to tell the time because I just know the positions. I don't need to say 7 o'clock. I just look at that and I know it's 7 o'clock. So when I'm driving, I could just go like this, and without reading it, I already know the time. The reason why I would often wear a digital watch in my right hand is if I need alarms, if I need like an hourly chime or something like that to remind me, if I am recording something more like how long did it take me to walk from point A to point B, I would use my wristwatch. So this does have a practical purpose. This one here also has a practical purpose. So that's often the reason why I would wear two watches. The second question is, does anyone really need a dedicated watch today? And my answer is, if you choose to allow a wristwatch to be a tool, then it is a very useful tool to use. So for instance, if you've always looked at the time on your cell phone, and besides that, you don't care about time, then for you, maybe a wristwatch, you'd have to learn to depend on a wristwatch to take a look at the time. It is really, I call it an active way instead of a passive way of gauging the passing of time. So you do have to look at it, but because it's on your wrist, and if you get used to looking at your wrist, like I mentioned, for me, I do, as I'm driving, I just go like this and I know the time. I don't need to ask Siri. I don't need to take a look at my phone to see the time. I know it's like right on my wrist, and this is where I choose to look at the time. So when people say nobody needs a watch, I don't know, because when you look at any kind of an elite type profession, you see like mountaineers, divers, pilots, search and rescue, different fields of military. They all wear watches, and they all wear dedicated watches. They don't wear Apple Watches or Garmin's. To me, they're devices. Watch is a tool. It's simpler. It actually does a better job. And one thing I was going to show is I would call them like essential tools. Right here, when I leave the house, this is in fact right by my entrance. When I leave the house, I always leave the house with 4 to 5 essential tools. So basically, a flashlight, a pen, a knife slash multi-tool. Oftentimes I will just carry a pocket knife with me, but multi-tool with a knife is also nice. Always a watch. And if I am not in the city and I'm maybe out in the country or going walking trails or going to the mountains, then I would carry a lighter. So to me, these 4 here are the most essential tools that I will always have on me. If you see me on the street and you ask, Take, show me your knife, your pen, your flashlight, and your watch, I will always have these 4 on me. So to me, does anyone really need a dedicated wristwatch today? Well, it depends on the person, but for me, 100% I will always have a wristwatch on me. So who is this particular watch for? So we'll go into more details, but basically this is a premium watch. This watch is not cheap, but neither are any of these Leica cameras. They're not cheap either. So obviously a certain type of person will buy a Leica watch. This is also a German design watch. And so it has that German kind of design ethos. You see it in their pens, you see it in their watches, you see it in their cameras. Germans have a certain way. You see it in their cars as well. You look at a Porsche or Mercedes-Benz, you look at a Kaweco or a Lamy pen, any German watch or a German camera. Anyone likes German design, this watch will be exactly what they're looking for. And finally, Leica engineering, design, history, and brand. So if you love those things about the brand Leica, Leica's engineering, their design ethos, their history of their design and their engineering, as well as the brand itself, then it makes sense to buy this watch. All purposeful tools serve me in 3 ways: function, storytelling, and style. So let's start off with the really simple of function. So I'll just take this watch off so we can kind of tour around this watch. So this is the ZM11 Titanium Launch Edition, and it is on a rubber strap, and there are only going to be 250 pieces here, and it's pretty hard to tell, but have you seen that little bit of that red poking through? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Basically, you need overhead light, which I don't have direct overhead light because I'm trying to avoid reflections coming straight down. So I have light coming from all different sides. But as well, you're shooting at a bit of an angle, and I'm shooting straight down. So if you're looking straight at the watch, you won't see the red. But even from the angle that I'm looking at, which is a little bit like that, I can see the red. And so maybe you can't see it. Currently, US pricing is $7,325 in this configuration, which is the ZM11 in titanium, in red, with the rubber strap and the titanium clasp here. You can get this optionally in stainless steel, again based on your configuration. There's a 5-year warranty on the Leica watch. 3 dial choices. This one here is red, then you have the blue, and then you have the coffee. Coffee looks pretty sharp. For me, between all the different ones, I would choose either the coffee or the red. And the strap options, there's also 3. You have the rubber strap here. I have 6.5-inch wrists, and my wrist basically goes to the minimum. You can see here, it is the smallest. So if you have wrists that are smaller than 6.5 inch, I don't recommend this watch, because 6.5, and it still goes a little bit over my wrist. And this is about the tightness that I like. And so right here, 41 millimeter diameter watch, grade 5 titanium case. And the weight of this is 61 grams case only, but let's actually weigh this in. Here I have this coffee scale here. All right, let's weigh here, watch with the rubber strap. In titanium, it is 92.6 grams. It feels nice and light. Some don't like titanium because when they buy a watch, they feel like they want weight on it because it makes them feel like they've bought more. But for a sports watch, I actually prefer titanium. I think the titanium is the right choice. There is a steel option with the blue dial. 3 strap choices. You have the rubber, metal, and you have the Cordura canvas, which looks really cool. And they are all using this quick release button, which is like this button. I'll be right back. Now, my M7 doesn't have, the M6 I think has a red dot, but see that button here to release the lens on this Leica M7 here? These buttons here with the red dot, first of all, red dot here, red dot there. These buttons here, red dots, it's a quick release mechanism here. So you can just quickly release these, swap between the different straps. So I would love to have, I mean, if I were to buy this watch, I think maybe getting it on the titanium bracelet, which looks beautiful, and I would love to test it with that. Now these watches are 100 meter waterproof with a screw down crown. Nice size. I think the ZM1, the ZM2 had a red dot, but this is a black dot here. But really easy to use. First position, basically you're winding. Second position is for the date. And then the final position, you're setting the time. And so really easy to use. Double dome sapphire crystal, single dome rear sapphire crystal. And that movement is just beautiful. It's called the LA 3001. It's a Swiss movement made with in collaboration with Chronode, really highly respected high-end Swiss watch movement company. I don't have the lens to get that's really closely in there, but again, I'll put in some inserts that was given to me from Leica, but just all the small little details, even the texture all along the edge here and on the inside, just a really nice looking movement. But it is sapphire crystal. It's 35 joules. It's a 4 hertz movement, so it's 8 beats per second or 28,800 beats per hour with a 60-hour power reserve. Basically, you put it on. I've worn this every day, and so I've never had to manually wind this watch with 60-hour power reserve. And the accuracy is basically a chronometer level. It's a -4 +6, super accurate. Right here is the G-Shock sync to the atomic clock, and it says 7:14, and here we go, it's pretty much 7:14, and so super accurate. It does have Swiss Super Luminova grade A lume, but you know, it's a sports watch. You have just enough lume so when you go indoors, you can sort of see, but also at the right angle, you get that nice sheen off of the markers there, so it's really easy to read. And as I mentioned before, it has that it's a 0.4 millimeter dual layer using an etching technique, which is quite unconventional in the watch industry. And it was designed by Marcus Ellinger at Leica, and his idea was playing with the idea of shadows and light. So you have to look at it at the right angle. And it was funny, there's a situation where a friend of mine, he had the watch on, he was looking at it straight down, he was taking photos of it to send to his wife, and he didn't see the red. And I told him there's red. He's like, I don't see it. And from my perspective, it was like glowing red. I'll probably put an insert here for you so you can see, but it was just so bright red because of the way the light was hitting it. But from his perspective, he couldn't see it. So the fact that you have to kind of play with it and take a look at it is a pretty fun watch to look at. So my time with this watch in terms of like functionality, easy to read, easy to wear. For this integrated bracelet, some might not like it. Some might want more of a traditional one where you just use the pin or screw in type lug. This just has a certain style. But for a sports watch, it's nice. And it probably part of the reasons why it can keep this reasonably small. 41 mil, but it doesn't look that oversized. Alright, so let's move on to the storytelling part of this video. I'll start off with a quote from Christian Hagen. If you guys are into watches, you'll know who Christian is. And in his video, talking about the ZM11, this was his quote. He says, the watch became a uniform of a hero. And he's talking about growing up, looking at Nat Geo magazine, seeing the type of people that wore watches, mountaineers, search and rescue, people with purposeful jobs, divers. And he saw them wearing a watch. He says it was a uniform of a hero product. And so I thought that was a great way of introducing this idea of how watches can tell stories. Now, the first story that most people buy into when it comes to a watch is the story that the manufacturer gives you. When you're buying an Explorer, you think about mountaineers. When you buy a Speedmaster, you think about it being, you know, the watch that was in space. Or Seamaster, maybe for my generation, it was the James Bond watch. But these are stories that are embedded in the brand, is embedded into a specific watch, and oftentimes that's why people buy specific watches. And so for Leica, they have their own story. Ernst Leitz the first, at age 20, he actually studied to be a watchmaker in Switzerland. Now, ultimately, back then, he ended up getting into, well, what he studied other than watchmaking is precision mechanics and precision instruments, and he started working with optics as well. And so he got into binoculars, he got into microscopes, and so Ernst Leitz the first was a trained watchmaker, and that training obviously would have found its way into all the other products that he started making. And in 1869, he started the Ernst Leitz company. And so that's kind of like the history of watches with Leica. But for me, it's more about even this. This is a Barnack design camera. And, you know, this is also precision mechanics, right? Finally made. Leica started in Wetzlar. You know what other company started in Wetzlar? Is Zeiss. And so you think about Zeiss, you think about names like Leica, you think about precision mechanics. And so you have a camera like this, springs, levers, gears. Here you can even wind this right here, right? And to me, what it takes to make a camera like this is very similar to making a watch. And another brand that you can think about is a brand like Porsche Design. 1972 came out with their first watch, and you know, that was really at the height of mechanical Swiss watchmaking. And back then, people might have thought, what's a car company doing making watches? And this is F.A. Porsche, who's a grandson of the founder of the Porsche car company. He actually designed the 911. So he knew mechanics, engineering, but he also knew design. And when he first came out with his first, I think it was the black chronograph in 1972, people may have thought, why would you buy a Porsche design watch? You could just buy any of the established Swiss watch brands. Looking back 50 years, we're thinking, oh, it makes complete sense for Porsche Design to make watches. Well, for me, Leica's exactly the same. For me, the story is, look at Leica's history of making cameras, making binoculars, making microscope, making scopes, optics, all these different products, precision mechanics, precision engineering, precision optics. And when you look at a watch, what do you see? You see all those same elements. If you go to Wetzlar, you'll see a building, and in that building, it is specifically for the watches. So some people are like, oh, Leica is just getting some other company to make the watches. Absolutely not. They have their R&D, manufacturing, assembly, and probably testing at Wetzlar headquarters in Germany. And of course, no watch, I mean, maybe other than maybe Seiko and Rolex, you need to collaborate with other brands to make different components of your watch. But in Wetzlar, they have people like Marcus Ellinger, and Marcus, as the creative director of the Leica watches, he actually worked with brands like Rolex and IWC and Zenith, and he actually designed the IWC Big Pilot. And so that's a pretty heavy hitter in the watch industry to be working with Leica to help. And he is the one that actually created the dual layer design with the red and black. So it makes complete sense that someone of that caliber in the watch industry would come up with something that innovative. Achim Hein, he's a product designer, has been at Leica for many years as well. So these are all heavy hitters, from Chronode to Marcus Ellinger to Achim Hein, and finally Andreas Kaufmann. Now, I interviewed Andreas in 2021. And you know, the funny thing is, I have him off camera because we actually laved him up and we're already starting to record. I have a 20-minute conversation of him just talking about watches. I don't know if I'm going to share it here or not. Maybe I'll take a little bit of that conversation and insert it here.
Well, form factor, in that case, we would probably also talk about design. Because even from the beginning of the first Leica, so basically the grandfather of the first Leica was done in 1914, and when it came on the market in 1925, it more or less looked the same. And when you see Leicas nowadays, you still see some DNA. So this is due to what I call German industrial design, German industrial engineering design related. It's not the same like some people would say, oh, that's Bauhaus. No, it's driven by the function, a bit like form follows function, but also how does it feel. So, and then you can create connections. So what we just launched the last days, the Leica watch, that it takes certain elements from the Leica design DNA, and I think we were able to show, yes, there's a connection.
Andreas Kaufmann had such a strong passion for watches, and in fact, I think he had a ZM1 on his wrist, and after the interview, he kept on referring to the watch. His assistant came up to him and said, the watch hasn't been launched yet, so you can't use any of that content where he's showing the watch. And so we actually had to bury that content. So I do have it on a hard drive. Andreas Kaufmann loves watches. He really wanted to make watches, and now it's one of his dreams has come true. It's part of that Leica ecosystem. So there is another story about watches. And so when you buy a watch, there's a storytelling element, right? The brand has its own story to tell, and it adds depth and meaning and ultimately value to the customer. And so some might say, well, why buy a Leica watch? Well, why buy Rolex? Why buy an Omega? It's not just the technical specs, because under the function, we went over the technical specs, and so there's lots of Swiss watches that have this level of technical specifications as well as quality of build. The price point is where this watch should be, but the bigger question is, why would you buy a Leica over a Rolex or over an Omega? Well, it comes down to the story. The brand has a story to tell, and do you appreciate the story that they have to tell? And I think that is where the value is for the customer. And for me, as someone who loves shooting with their cameras, and like I mentioned about Porsche design, back then it might not have made sense in 1972 for a car company to make watches. Well, now here is a camera company. Not just a camera company, but a precision mechanics and engineering and optics company that's been around for about 150 years. They've decided to start making their own watches. And when you buy a watch, so whatever story that the watch has from the manufacturer, as soon as you buy it, then you add your own story. And the longer that you have the watch, the deeper and richer the story becomes for you. And so if you can tell stories with your brand, which Leica can, and you can tell stories with your watches, which I do all the time. Everything I wear, from my watches to my shoes, if you see someone wearing Jordan 1s, they're telling a story with what they're wearing. Sure, shoes are functional, but they're also a way to tell stories. I tell stories with my watches. They tell me the time, but they also tell stories, and that's why the second way that I look at watches as storytelling tools. The final area is, so we talked about function, storytelling. Now finally we're looking at style. And style can be, it can be both objective and subjective, right? Some watches, some people consider really ugly, and maybe the majority of the watch world says that's a really ugly watch. But there's some people who love it. I mean, the fact that it's in the marketplace and people are buying it means people like it. Like, for instance, Panerai. A lot of people don't like Panerais now because they're overly large. And for some people, like right now, the trend is to go smaller. So these are 38 mil watches. I have a 6.5 inch wrist, so I prefer 38 mil. This is a 40 mil chronograph. So to me, 38 and 40 is the right size. 41 in a sports watch on a rubber strap works as well for me. This is a 43 mil watch, but look how big the bezel. This is a diver's watch. So even though it's 43, you just see the white dial, and the white dial looks more like a 36 mil dial, and it's also super thick, but the whole thing is black, so it looks a lot smaller. But style is subjective, right? Diver's style, here's a G-Shock, right? They all have a certain style. Well, with Leica, what you're getting here is a German Leica design language in these watches, and Leica goes into depth talking about the design language, to looking at cues of cameras, and as well as Leica's history and how they can incorporate some modern, like for me, this ZM11 series goes really well with the SL and the Q, as well as the Deluxe, right? It's more of a modern take of the Leica watch. The ZM1 and the ZM2 is a little bit more traditional, more classical. I'll say it because, hey, I'm an old gentleman. I would wear a ZM1 or ZM2. This is sportier. Even the buckle is quite oversized. And so the ZM11 is a sports watch, which really it differentiates itself from the ZM1 and ZM2, which is more of a classical kind of a style watch. And so again, style is very personal. Function, of course, I want the watch to work. Then I want to know the story. And then the third most important thing to me is style. So they look cool, right? You want cool things like shoes. You need functional shoes. You need something on your feet, but sometimes you have dress shoes on. Dress shoes are not necessarily that comfortable, but they got a lot of style. Now, there are sneakers with a lot of style, but there's a reason to wear dress shoes. There's a reason to wear sneakers. There's a reason to wear Birkenstocks. Some may argue there's no reason to ever wear Birkenstocks, but again, I love things German and I love my Birkenstocks. But with watches, the same thing. They exude a certain style. It tells other people and it tells you, like fashion is that way, isn't it? It's the matter of style. When you dress a certain way, you're communicating things. And so it's kind of like storytelling. You are communicating sort of your values and the things that you like and the style that you like. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is market value. And that's something I don't want to talk about on a personal level. But for this video, I will talk about it because I actually had a little bit of a debate with a friend of mine who is a high-end watch collector, and he gets hired by people to go and track down really rare watches. And we were talking about the Leica watch, and he was throwing out other names. Like he basically said, you know, you could get an Omega Aquaterra or, you know, like a certain spec'd out Rolex Oyster Perpetual for about the same price. So why would I buy this watch instead of an Omega or Rolex? Because what are you talking about? Market value. And he's like, well, the true value of a watch is when they start selling secondhand on the used market. And that'll tell you if the price that the brand is asking for equals the price that people are willing to pay. And I don't buy that. I mean, to a certain degree, that's true. But you think about the pandemic, some watches tripled in value because of the demand. That was an artificial demand. That's an artificial market value for about 3 years during the pandemic. And then the prices crashed. And for those that are investing in watches, that are buying it for market value, for them, they're like this watch is worthless. No, the watch never changed. That watch was always the same. It's just how people perceived the watch during that time. And so with my friend, I basically said to him, you know what? I buy a watch because I like it, and I don't care about resale value. As soon as it serves the function that I want it for, and there's a story behind it that I love, and then over time, you know, this is an over 20-year-old watch. You can even see some of that patina on this watch. I've made 20 years of stories with this watch here. I don't care about value. If this ended up becoming, you know, worth 10 times more than what I paid for, that's fine. I don't really care what the market value is. And so what is the market value of this watch? Well, we'll see what it sells on the secondhand market. But again, I don't think you should care. If I buy a watch, I buy it because I love it, not because of market value. Thank you so much, Leica Watches, for sending this to me. Thank you, Christian Dowling. He's a Australian Leica ambassador, and he really kind of helped me through this process of getting the watch. And thank you, Leica USA, as well, for sending this watch to me. I love watches. You can tell I don't do this for a living, but I've been wearing watches for like over 40 years. I've loved watches. I'm very particular about the watches that I love. I'm very serious about my watch collection. When I wear them, they're storytelling tools. I love the style that they have. Every time I look down at my wrist, it reminds me of why I bought it, but also it serves a function. And so thank you so much, Leica, for sending this watch to me. I hope to review other watches, and I look forward to more watches for them to release. And over time, I am quite confident that Leica watches would do very well. I love Leica as a German manufacturer of precision mechanical tools. I love their design language in their cameras, going back to the 1920s, all the way up to a modern digital Leica and a modern design Leica right here, Brutalist Design SL. I love the Leica brand history and the story behind him and all the various Ernst Leitz the first who started the company, Ernst Leitz the second that changed the direction of the company to really a high-risk product, cameras, as well as the story of Andreas Kaufmann, who basically bought Leica, revived the brand, and now he's introduced watches to the brand. So this is a new modern history of Leica. So I look forward to more watches and cameras. I'm going to put this watch back on, and hopefully you'll see the little hits of red as I'm putting the watch on. And now we will grab this Barnack Leica here, and we'll wind up the Leica motor. Such a cool design here, right? Again, 1920s design. Look at this. Precision mechanics, precision engineering, and optics. Thank you so much for watching, and happy shooting.